You ever think about how much change really costs? Not the fake kind of change, not the kind that you have to dye your hair, or, get a certain kind of haircut. You post a quote and you call it growth. No, I'm talking about real change. The kind of change that forces you to confront yourself. The kind that keeps you up at night. The kind that keeps you thinking, waiting about how your life might shape up. The kind that makes you feel like you're shedding skin that was never meant to stay on you in the first place. Sometimes we glamorize change. We put it in t-shirts and songs and Instagram reels and TikToks like it's some easy romantic journey. But the truth is that change is violent, not outwardly, not always, but internally it shakes up everything you thought to believe was true. You thought to believe that was certain in your life, and that shaking is where the cost shows up. You know, comfort will be the first thing to go. The first thing that change asks for is your comfort. It's like you evolve. When you evolve, you can't stay cozy at the same time. You can't stay in the same room, same rhythm, the same habits, and expect a different life to just land in your lap. I've spoken about this in my previous videos. Change knocks on the door, sometimes barges in. When you open that door, it doesn't wait for your permission, it just walks in. It flips all the furniture, it pulls all the curtains down, empties your closet, and undoes what you've been surviving in. It takes away that thing you've been leaning on like a clutch, like it takes away that thing you've been using for superstition. And it asks you to boss up, it asks you to move on, it asks you to change. Most people, they don't realize how much of their life is built around comfort until it's gone. They don't realize how much of their identity is wrapped within staying okay, is wrapped within playing it safe, is wrapped within that safety, that net that you call home. I tend to believe that home is not something you go back to, but home is something that you carry with you every single day. Home is something that you take with you wherever you go. We think change is some upward motion, a smooth climb, but sometimes it's more of losing your footing to figure out how you can walk differently. It's not progress that feels like a straight line, it's falling forward, 1,000 times until you realize you're not the same person who started this journey. And the next thing that may happen is that you may lose people that love you, or you thought love you. No one talks about when you grow, you might grow away from people. Not out of spite, not out of ego, but simply because your direction changed, simply because you yourself is not the same person as you were yesterday. And when people see that, they tend to think that you're attacking them in a sense, because you don't want to stay the same person that they love. You don't want to stay that version of yourself that they love, so you stop dealing with you in general. They see you as a threat more than, inspiration. They see you as more of, someone to be feared, and it's not someone to be looked at and say, hey, I want to be like that person. Change scares people, and it's not your fault. Embracing change is not something that you should be blamed for. If anything, you should be admired for. If anything, you should be accepted for. But we live in a world where staying comfy is the way to go. We live in a world that says comfort is the only thing that is constant. The consistency of comfort is how you lose your life. The consistency of comfort is how you lose everything. The consistency of comfort is how you miss out on so many things that are for you. Staying inside of a home that you've outgrown, staying inside of a room that doesn't belong to you anymore. When are we going to pick up our luggage and go someplace elsewhere? When are we going to start packing up the things that we don't even need to pack up these things. We don't need them. I don't think we need them. They don't serve us anymore, so why do we serve them? When you grow, those people start to resent you, just because you want something different for your life. You don't want to drink every weekend. You don't want to group and gossip to fill silence. You don't want to stay broken just to feel relatable. And suddenly the people who once felt like home don't feel safe anymore. You no longer fit that version of their life where you never questioned anything. It's often a silent goodbye most of the time. There's no argument, no fallout, just space and silence. And the echo, oh, we used to be close. Oh, what happened between me and you? Echoing in your chest like an old song you can't unhear. And you start to question, was the cost really worth it? Was the cost really worth it? But I bet to ask you a deeper question, was staying small worth the comfort? Was staying small worth the amount of opportunities that you've missed? You know, you grieve versions of yourself. You look in the mirror, you don't even recognize who you are. You know, not in a glow up kind of way, not in like a maturity, but you've outgrown who you were. Now you're floating in this in between space, not of who you were, not quite who you're becoming, but you're there. It feels like a liminal space, really. It feels like something that, you know, you can only describe on freaking sci-fi TV. You know, it's this space that, you know, we occupy and we're like confused on where we're going. You know, but I think that's the whole point. I really think that's the whole point. Being confused on where you're going, being lost, I feel is the only point. I feel like when you're lost, that's the only way you can find where you're going. That's the only way you can make a way. You know, sometimes being lost is a good thing. I'm not saying go and purposely get lost. I'm saying sometimes we need to leave home to figure out where we want to go. You know, home cannot be home forever. Comfort cannot be home forever. It can only serve you for so long. That life you have currently can only serve you for so long. This, what I'm doing here, can only serve me for so long. I'm going to have to evolve, you know. But I think that's the great thing about life. We have opportunities to evolve. We have opportunities to get better. We have so much opportunities. That's such a blessing in my eyes. Who wants to be the same thing forever? Not me. Who wants to live the same life forever? Not me. Certain you shouldn't want to do that either. You know. No. But that person in that space I was speaking about before I got off topic, that limbo, you know, that's grief. You know, people think grief is just about death, but it's also about identity. You know, you grieve your old mindset, your old coping mechanisms, your old belief systems that you kept safe. And even though they no longer serve you, it still hurts to let them go because they were familiar. They were home, they were you for a very, very long time. And when you start to live as a new version of yourself, you almost feel like a stranger in your own life. It's lonely. Not because the people around you abandoned you, because you have to abandon the person you thought you needed to be to survive. That's the cost no one talks about. That's the price no one speaks about that you have to pay. The ego has to die as well. You have to bury your ego. As simple as that. You not lower it, not tame it, but you have to bury it. Change is humbling. It forces you to admit that you're wrong, that you held on to things out of pride, that you weren't always right. You know, that you judge people for walking roads that you hadn't walked yet. Change sits you down and says, look at the pain you've caused. Look at the potential you've ignored. Look at the fears that you let speak for you. I'm going to make a video about fear because I feel like that's something a lot of people do not know how to drive through. But yeah, it stings, you know. It does sting. But I feel like that's the beauty about it. Because if you're not honest about your mess, you'll never know what healing tastes like. You know, you just keep performing while bleeding constantly, internally, you know. And that's not even growth, performance. That's not growth. That's spiritual cosplay. That's spiritual cosplay. It costs time and patience. You cannot change overnight. It's not possible. You can perform overnight, but you cannot change overnight. Change takes time. And I feel like so many of us try to rush it. But change is what makes us human. You know, caterpillars just don't blossom from butterflies within the next couple of days. You know, it takes time. And time is all we have. We have to direct it. Or else it'll just go anywhere. And we have to take time by the scruff of the neck. I spoke about it in my last video. We have to want it before anything. We have to pay that price no matter what it is. We cannot choose to play it safe 24/7. We cannot stay small because of comfort. God has called you to be so much bigger than what you are right now. God has called you to be so much bigger than who you are right now, than what you are, than what you're doing. Are we going to pick up that call or are we going to let it go to voicemail? It's up to you to decide. Thank you for watching. I love you all. Thank you so much. Appreciate every single thing. Goodbye.